Hello and welcome to the Young, Textless, and Reformed podcast. I'm your host, Taylor DeSoto, and you may have noticed that I have rebranded the YouTube channel to match my blog, youngtextlessreformed.com. The original intention of the Christ and Culture YouTube channel was actually to address culture and talk about politics and all these sorts of things, but there's enough people doing that. So at some point I switched my blog over, or my YouTube over, to exclusively textual criticism related content, TR related content. So I thought I would consolidate my branding, and that's what you're going to see. There's going to be a new banner going up, and all of it's going to be extremely low budget. So there's not like, as in $0. I'm going to have one of my buddies make a banner in Paint or something. And so anyway, just so people aren't thrown off, yes, I'm rebranding it just to match everything up across all platforms. So that being said, we have something interesting to review today. This comes from the Evangelical Textual Criticism blog, which is kind of where a lot of the textual scholars kind of come here and post articles and things like this. So this particular comment thread exists on a post called "Is Codex Sinaiticus Fake? New News," or New Evidence. So if you're unfamiliar with the context of this whole discussion, there are some people that allege that Codex Sinaiticus, which is one of the two major unseals that the critical text is supported by, is a fake. It's a forgery. Not from the 4th or 5th century. It's actually a forgery. So some people allege that. I would say, by and large, the majority of people reject this allegation. But we're not going to be talking about the actual allegation. I want to talk about this comment thread. Because this comment thread exemplifies what I talk about when I'm talking about credentialism, when I talk about sort of the scholarly guild, when I talk about the sort of gatekeeping that goes on, that prevents the layperson from actually contributing to the discussion and making the layperson feel like they can't have an opinion on textual criticism and textual scholarship. This comment thread is the perfect example. So what we have here are two commenters. We have Unknown and Elijah Hickson, who, if you're unfamiliar with, is a textual scholar who specializes, as far as I know, in manuscript forgeries. Did his PhD work on the purple manuscripts. So with that said, let's dive in on this thread. I think you guys are going to find it really helpful, really entertaining. So Unknown on 4/3/21 says, "I am surprised that no one in this discussion has so far dealt with Tischendorf, having stolen 43 leaves from this codex, being Sinaiticus, and lied multiple times to various people about it. Moreover, Simonides claims to have compiled this document afresh using various manuscripts before him. It is strongly supported by the testimony of others. It is certainly possible that he copied from more ancient documents, but without establishing their provenance, that is where they came from, we can't say how old these were. In summary, the claim that Codex Sinaiticus is a 4th or 5th century manuscript is utterly bogus." Now, we're not going to talk about anything he says, really, but I want to talk about what Dr. Elijah Hickson says here. He says, "Unknown, thanks for the comment," which I think is kind of a funny way to start a comment. Unknown. 1, what's your name? 2, do you know any Greek? 3, have you any experience with manuscripts? E.g., ever had to do something like read through one, pay attention to things like the strokes of the pen used to make each letter form and how consistent the scribe was letter for letter across a book? 4, we'll go into 4 later. Let's talk about the kind of gatekeeping that we're seeing here. And Elijah's done this to me. He does this to everybody. Let's evaluate what's going on here. So 1, what's your name? Now, I can respect this question, right? Like, why give your time to people that are anonymous on the internet, right? Not really worth your time. They could be anyone. They could be a dog on the internet, you know? Yeah, who knows? Who knows who they are? The first question would be okay if Elijah didn't write anything else after it. If he was basically saying, listen, I'll talk to you about this, but I need to know who I'm talking to. Am I talking to a troll? Are you a real person? Are you an AI machine? Like, who knows? But the fact that he doesn't end the comment there lets me know that he's doing something different. And we're going to see this come out more in number 2. 2, do you know any Greek? Okay. This is probably the number one way that the Scholarly Guild gatekeeps the conversation right now. And men like James White gatekeep the conversation. They basically say you have to know Greek, which James White doesn't know Greek all that well. You have to know Greek in order to participate in this discussion. Look at the claim, right? Look at the assertions in the unknown comment, right? I am surprised no one in this discussion has dealt so far with Tischendorf having stolen manuscripts, lying about it, the fact that there's Simonides claims to actually have compiled Codex Sinaiticus. Those claims have absolutely nothing, first of all, to do with the name of the commenter. Second of all, to do with whether or not the commenter knows Greek. He's not making a claim regarding Greek. He's making a claim about history. And you don't need to know history, or you don't need to know Greek to read English history, right? History written in English. So, or German, or whatever the language was. You don't need to know Greek to parse through history. So 2 is a ridiculous question, but he's doing some gatekeeping here. So 3, have you any experience with manuscripts? Again, irrelevant. He's not making a claim about the actual quality of the manuscripts, as Dr. Hickson goes on and says, have you looked at the stroke of the pen, the letter form? The commenter is not making any claims about the letter form. He's not making any claims about the scribal consistency. He's not making any claims of the strokes of the pen at all. So question 3, again, irrelevant. Now, why am I bringing this up on my channel? Why is this something important to talk about? This is not, necessarily related to the theology of textual criticism or, the things I usually cover. I want to point out to my viewership that this is the kind of argumentation you're going to see out there. And what you're getting here is essentially Dr. Hickson setting up a gate, and he's saying, unless you can pass through this gate, you can't even comment on history. You're not even allowed to make an assessment of historical data that isn't written in Greek. So that, I think that's really, really kind of malicious, don't you? Don't you think that's a little malicious? Anyway, I'm going to take a sip of coffee. My throat's scratchy. Which I suppose wouldn't help if my throat's scratchy. But anyway, we'll continue. So 4, he says, would you walk into a bank and say, so here we're using an analogy. Let's see if the analogy's any good. I love analogies. 4, would you walk into a bank and say to the bank manager, I haven't kept or paid for anything with physical cash in 15 years. And I've never looked at how to counterfeit money or what to look for to know the signs of counterfeits. But for you to say that this stack of 100s is real is utterly bogus. Maybe you're the only one out there who isn't like this, but in my experience, every single person I've come across, without exception, who is willing to entertain the Sinaiticus as a forgery claim fails into this final category. So you're not a forgery expert like I am, and therefore you cannot weigh in on the discussion. His analogy would be correct if the original... It's almost like he didn't even read the comment. That would be okay if this unknown commenter was basically going through and saying, hey, this is a forgery because of, this particular text on this line, and you can tell because of the stroke of the pen, and there's inconsistency in these 2 places. Like, he's not making a claim about the forgery. So, but Dr. Hickson is actually responding as though a claim was made about the actual textual quality of the manuscript or perhaps the paper. No, that claim has not been made. So what we see here is just very blatant and irrelevant gatekeeping going on here. So then James Snap pops into the discussion. In addition to the points made at, in he posts his link. I'm surprised that no one in this discussion so far. So basically, James Snap is just popping in. He's everywhere on the internet. If you've never interacted with James Snap, he's like, it's like he has like a machine that tells him where to go on all these blogs. Like he just knows when to pop in. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap this video up pretty shortly here. But what I want my viewership to really pay attention to here is how these kinds of arguments are used in the text criticism discussion to try and make your voice irrelevant. Do you know any Greek? Well, most people don't. And even the people that say they, quote unquote, know Greek couldn't order a sandwich in Greece today if they wanted to. They know how to parse words with Greek tools. That's what most people mean. Not every person, but most people, what they mean when they say they know Greek, they know between 500 and 1,000 vocab words, which is less than my 2-year-old knows, or my 3-year-old now. 3-year-old knows, and they know how to parse vocabulary and things like this. That is not knowing a language. Really, if this person has access to Logos Bible software, then they could probably claim they know Greek just as well as most seminary students. So, irrelevant question. But you get these kinds of questions asked all the time within the context of the textual discussion, and even outside of the textual discussion. When you're debating soteriology, Arminianism versus Calvinism, you see this all the time. The original Greek actually says this, and it's like, you don't know Greek. And then what they'll do is they'll bash the other person over the head and say, well, do you know Greek? I know Greek because I looked something up in a lexicon. There's this crazy amount of gatekeeping that goes on in these modern discussions, and it's absolutely irrelevant. What we need to do is we need to learn how to be thinkers. We need to learn how to understand that, this Cambridge-educated scholar looked at this comment and decided to do some gatekeeping. Rather than addressing the claim of the leaves being stolen, rather than addressing the claims about Simonides, no, we're just going to do some gatekeeping. And a lot of the time you'll see in these comments, people will come through and they'll say, yeah, you really got him. It's like, no, you just reminded him that he doesn't know as much as you. And sometimes that's relevant. If we were talking about translating Greek, I guess it would definitely be important to know Greek. But when it comes to history, why do you need to know Greek to parse through history, to assess a historical claim? What Dr. Hickson, if he was thinking like a Cambridge-educated scholar, he would address the historical assertions made by this Mr. Unknown. And the fact that a Cambridge-educated intellectual can't do that is actually, first of all, a profound condemnation on King's College. I mean, profound condemnation. And a profound condemnation on every college that is less, high caliber as Cambridge. So when we talk about the scholarly guild and we talk about this kind of gatekeeping that goes on, like these scholars, all they have are these letters behind their name. All they have is a very expensive piece of paper, and what they don't have is the ability to follow a stream of thought most of the time. It seems, this is very exemplary of a lot of the other stuff you're going to see out there. I mean, I would just say go to like a Bible discussion or debate Facebook group or something. You're going to see these kinds of arguments all the time. Where did you study textual criticism? Do you know any Greek? Have you examined a manuscript? Well, you don't actually need to have done any of those things to address a lot of the claims that the critical text makes. Because most of their claims are not actually about manuscript data or the Greek. They try to make it seem that way. They'll say this is just an argument about data, and if you reject the data, then, you're just a fundamentalist. It's like, well, we're not talking about the data. We're talking about whether or not you can reconstruct what you said you could. We're talking about, do we have a Bible today? And your textual data doesn't say anything about that. We're talking about a theological topic to which every Christian has the obligation, duty, and ability to do. So when scholars do this sort of gatekeeping, it prevents the layperson from feeling like they have the ability to push back at ideas that they don't agree with. And in this case, I don't know if unknown's right. I mean, I don't really care if Sinaiticus is a forgery or not. I mean, it's probably not. I don't know. But if you have to, if you are an expert in a manuscript forgery and you can't respond to two simple assertions, and instead you have to actually bash someone over the head with your credentials, how much are those credentials worth? I mean, I would say not very much. So in closing, I think the value in this interaction is really two things. First of all, the scholarly guild, I think, is scared, or perhaps insecure. They have all these credentials, they have all of this learning and knowledge, and they've published so many papers, and they've done all this work, but they don't have the ear of the church. The common person doesn't understand anything they say when they speak. And for the most part, the topic of textual criticism is very boring and uninteresting to people. So they don't have like the sort of accolades that you might expect from someone who is so accomplished in a particular discipline. That's one thing. The second thing is that a lot of the times, the responses you get from the most educated people, the most learned people, are credentialism, gatekeeping, and essentially reminding you of your place. And that's what this is. He's saying, hey, peasant, step down. You are not equipped for this conversation. And he maybe isn't, but it kind of looks like, to me, that Dr. Hickson isn't equipped for this interaction. The fact that he had to just talk about his credentials and remind the guy that he's anonymous on the internet. Like, listen, one thing you need to know about the internet as a tangent: everyone can be anonymous on the internet. You can have a name, a face, a job associated with your profile, and you could still be a fake profile on the internet. I mean, I assume that for the most part that everyone's anonymous on the internet, unless I'm on like Facebook where there's, but for the most part on Facebook there are fake profiles on Facebook. But the fact that he first says you're unknown and all this stuff, so this is something that we need to watch for as we're developing our discernment within the context of the text criticism discussion. It is monumentally important that we're able to spot these kinds of arguments and recognize when someone is arguing this way, it means they either don't want to answer your question, or they're not thinking clearly enough to answer your question, in which case you probably need to talk to someone else who's thinking more clearly, who can have a more measured and metered discussion. Unless that's not what you're looking for, which most people aren't, I don't think. But that's the big takeaway from this video. Learn to recognize this kind of gatekeeping. Learn to recognize that this kind of gatekeeping is a sign of either insecurity or inability to navigate a basic conversation. So we really do need to put our foot down and say enough of these kinds of bad arguments. This is the kind of argumentation you're going to see out here, guys. Folks, as some are known to say. So thank you for watching this first episode of the Young, Textless, and Reformed podcast. I know it was kind of a meta podcast, but I hope some people find it interesting. If you didn't tune out early on, I think it's an interesting topic: argument analysis and actually picking apart the way that people think is really an interesting way to approach a discussion, to see how people are processing the information, how they're responding to the information. Are they following the argument? Are they responding directly? Are they responding indirectly? Are they diverting completely, like we see here? Really, really, really important stuff to developing our discernment. So Thanks for watching again. I'm your host, Taylor DeSoto, with the Young Texas and Reformed podcast. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you.